Welcome into Locked On Knicks. Are the Knicks true contenders? And do they sit in a class with only the reigning NBA champions as far as teams that could win the Eastern Conference this year? We're going to talk about all that and more right now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Knicks first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in the sights and sounds on YouTube. We appreciate you making us a part of your daily routine. Make sure you hit that auto download function on your favorite podcast app or the notification bell on YouTube so you never miss an episode. I'm Alex Wolf. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site, The Strickland, which you can find strict.land, and he is Gavin Shaw, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster. And today, a little different way that we're doing the show. So earlier this week, I did a segment with Jackson Gatlin on Locked On NBA, where he asked me a pretty simple question. Are the Knicks contenders or pretenders? And then at the end, we ranked the would-be contenders out of the Eastern Conference, which I thought was a good enough discussion that we should share with you all today to lead the show. So without further ado, let me talk to Jackson Gatlin. And then in the next segment, Gavin and I are going to get into our own rankings of the Eastern Conference elite and where we think everybody falls.
We are tackling contenders or pretenders of the Eastern Conference. Alex, we're going to start right there. Why should the New York Knicks be considered legitimate contenders going into this next season?
I think if you look at their body of work last year, I mean, they end up a 50-win team. It came right down to the wire, but 2-seed is a 2-seed. You know, whether it happened on the final day of the season or not, they were the second and the only other team in the Eastern Conference to win 50 or more games last year. The continuity, I think, is really big. I think that when you look at, the two hot teams that everybody wants to discuss the merits of contender or pretender in the East this year, Boston obviously is one. Milwaukee mostly is staying the same. So, you kind of just base that off of, can they stay healthy, this, that, the other. But the Sixers and the Knicks made great strides to get better this offseason. And I think that the huge difference between the two of them, when you're talking about who's potentially, in the pole position right now, would be the Knicks basically taking the same exact team and running it back, plus Mikal Bridges, whereas the Sixers kind of blew everything up. So I think that's like one of the main things where I feel more confident in the Knicks, like to say repeat as the second seed again, potentially be able to threaten Boston, all this other stuff, is that continuity. Like they have this team that knows each other so well. Obviously Isaiah Hartenstein, losing him, I think is probably a bigger deal than maybe people realize at like a national level. He was really, really key to what they did down the stretch of last season. But if they can count on Mitchell Robinson to stay healthy, which hopefully that's the case, and if Precious Achiuwa can step up like he did at times last year, plus if they experiment a little more with small ball and with running OG Anunoby out there as your de facto 5-man on defense, to do a little rim protection from time to time and lean on Julius Randle's rebounding prowess, or have him out there with Precious and, see if that works, whatever. I think there's a way for the Knicks to absorb that loss of Hartenstein. A lot of it hinges on Mitchell Robinson staying mostly healthy throughout the year. So I guess we'll see how that goes. That's been a not exactly a safe bet. So I think if there was one thing that I would say, and maybe this is going to be your next question, but one thing that it keeps them from potentially being a legit contender, it might be that center spot. But otherwise, they're just so deep at the guard positions, at the forward positions, just everything other than that center spot. I feel like they just have championship level depth. And I really think that there's a chance that they win like potentially upwards of 60 games this year and could maybe even push to try to press Boston a little bit if things go right, because that Tibbs is going to try to get as much regular season success as possible out of this team as well. So yeah, I think think that's kind of where I'm at now. I think a couple things need to break right, but you could say that about almost any team that has title aspirations. And if they do break right, then I think the Knicks have a real shot at it this year.
You didn't just steal my next question. You stole my next like 3 questions, man. I was ready to rock and roll over here, and you're like, you hit the Hartenstein angle, and you no. So we'll just call it quits. We'll wrap this thing up. No, look. So first of all, I also think obviously losing Hartenstein is a big one, and you brought up a really interesting point there that I am curious to pick your brains about a little bit further. Though is the Mitchell Robinson angle, right? Like how much do you expect him to lean on Mitchell Robinson versus going into that small ball dynamic? The fact that we even saw in the playoffs this last season, right? OG Anunoby working against a Joel Embiid, right? Like that was almost like akin to when the Warriors would roll out their death ball lineup back during the peak Warriors era, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's something that Gavin and I talk about all the time on our show, and a lot of Knicks fans are talking about now that the Knicks have sort of once they re-signed Precious Achiuwa, that was them effectively waving the white flag for now on trying to find another like true center to back up Mitch there. I do think that in Tibbs's ideal world, Mitch is still playing like 30 minutes a night, if not more. And Precious, maybe then would absorb like 10 minutes, and then you maybe roll with 8 minutes of small ball. And it's kind of funny because I think that a lot of people, Knicks fans included, and it was properly founded for the first couple years with Tibbs because he was, I think, a lot more stubborn then and has shown a lot of growth late in his career as a coach. But I think that a lot of people would be like, well, I'll believe it when I see it as far as him going small. But there were certain other things like last year, it was like the Knicks sort of forced his hand roster construction wise by saying, okay, we traded Obi Toppin and we're not going to sign another true backup four. So you can either play Josh Hart at the four or I guess try to roll out two centers. Like, what else is your plan here? And he did conform and rolled out Josh Hart at the four. And so I think that maybe this is the Knicks front office too, sort of trying to force his hand a little bit once they realized like, hey, Walker Kessler or whoever isn't available for a fair amount. We're gonna make sure that you run OG Anunoby out there now as like the de facto five for a handful of minutes per game, and let's see how that works. Because Precious is not going to be that perfect answer all the time. He's a little up and down as far as how he plays. At his best, he's done really well for the Knicks. At his worst, he's been, not able to stay on the floor, especially in limited minutes. So we'll see how that goes. But I think that I think that's going to be a big part of them potentially, finding a new gear that allows them to reach that sort of championship level play, because I think every championship team needs a few different looks that they can throw out there. You can't just play the same way all the time and expect to win a championship. But that said, I think if you ask Tibbs like what his ideal is, it would be I want Mitchell Robinson opening games. I want him closing halves. I want this team to function best with Mitchell Robinson out there because he loves having that dominant drop defensive center that can, completely wall off the paint and then let the perimeter guys kind of cook as far as, playing the passing lanes and stuff like that. So that's definitely his ideal, but we'll see if that comes to be or not this year.
You mentioned kind of the five spot, and we spent a little bit of time talking about that so far as potentially a point of weakness for this Knicks team. Is there anything else aside from health being a factor? Because any team could say health, as the biggest point of weakness. When you look up and down at this Knicks team, any major point of weakness?
I wouldn't call it a major point of weakness, but maybe something that people go to as a talking point would be the backup point guard spot, sort of. I think that there's this interesting,
like the fall off when Brunson's not on the court, essentially.
yeah, like I think there's this sort of interesting thing right now where you've got a weird mix of guys behind him. So you have Campaign, who they signed for a veterans minimum deal, who is a pretty experienced, good NBA backup guard. That definitely is the most I won't say the most point guardy, but the most experienced, like, quote, true point guard that they have on the roster in NBA service time. Then you have Tyler Kolek, who they just drafted, who they clearly really like a lot. They gave him the biggest second round contract in NBA history. He signed for 4 years. Like, they were clearly like super excited that he made it to them and very quick to invest in him and say, this is a guy that we want on this team for a number of years to see how he does. And he had a really nice summer league, especially as far as like how he might fit with the bench unit. He's going to be surrounded by shooting on that bench unit. I think there's a real chance for him to find some minutes there. But I think the main guy is Deuce McBride, and I think the big question has been like it's very similar to the Emmanuel Quickly discourse that there was for a long time with the Knicks, during before he got traded, which is he a point guard or not? And like a lot of people are like, that's silly. It doesn't matter. He's just a talented basketball player. I think that Deuce is less point guard talented than Emmanuel Quickly, but I think that with that bench unit, it won't matter as much. So I think you can probably get away with, if Brunson's going to play like 35 minutes a game, if you got to play Deuce 13 out there without Brunson, I think that's okay. I also think that they play great together, so it would be a shame if they never really got to play together as a result. But I think you'll be all right with that because Dante DiVincenzo can bring the ball down and set up a play. Josh Hart can certainly do that and proved pretty good at that during the postseason and a lot of the regular season last year. And then you also might just they're probably going to run a nine-man rotation again, which means there's going to be a decent amount of time we're going to have Julius Randle out there with those three guys. Because I think Julius Randle will be the guy that they lean on sort of to stagger his time with Brunson from time to time and have Randle sort of run things with the bench unit and, be the distributor for that group too. So I guess maybe like on paper, that's one thing that looks maybe a little worrisome is like, okay, who do you have be that like quote backup point guard? But I feel like that will play itself out in such a way that it won't be too big of an issue other than that center issue as far as like things to worry about with this team going into the year.
Looking at kind of the teams projecting to be at the top of the Eastern Conference this next season, how would you power rank these four teams? Celtics, Bucks, 76ers, Knicks. Go.
I think Celtics, unfortunately, Knicks, Sixers, Bucks, I think right now. I guess I just don't quite buy it with the Bucks as of this second, like they had the team that they have now last year. And I think that GTJ is a great pickup for them. So maybe that's the swing thing that kind of elevates them. Like it's crazy that they got him on a veterans minimum. Like that is just an absolute heist considering the talent level of scorer that he is. But with them, they're just so fragile. Like they're living on a real fine line, like at all times because of the age of their core, the fact that like if Giannis goes down, they're really screwed for an extended period of time. If Dame Lillard gets hurt, they're in rough shape. If Middleton gets hurt, which you kind of just have to assume he's going to only play like 30 games a season at this point, based off past results, like I just feel like there's a very small margin for error for them. Whereas I think that I think the Celtics and the Knicks are the deepest teams, and therefore I think most well equipped to get through the regular season, potentially end with, a good record at the end of the year. And potentially that I think Knicks fans saw over this past year, like even for all the depth they had, sometimes the injuries just catch up to you. I think the Knicks and Celtics are best equipped to deal with all that. Whereas I think the Sixers, for as good as their core three is with Maxey and Embiid and George, I like some of the depth pieces that they've been able to fill out the roster with, but none of them are particularly moving me in a way that like the Celtics and Knicks depth is, combined with the fact that you also have two guys on the Sixers that are also injury risks with George and Embiid being the hugest one. So that, I think that's what sort of leads to my rationale there. But I think the Sixers overall, weirdly, even though I think that Embiid is probably the biggest injury risk of all those guys in those bottom two teams, I think that they're a little less on the edge just because I think Maxey and George could carry you a little better than like the Bucks core could without Giannis. So I think that that's where they're at. But those two are almost interchangeable to me because in many ways, I think they have a lot of the same weaknesses as far as what could bite them over the course of a full 82 game season plus playoffs. So I think that's why I'm at that. So it's sort of like Celtics, Knicks 1-2, and then a little bit of a delta, and then Sixers and Bucks for me.
Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicles and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers.
All right, Gavin. So we just heard my thoughts when I talked with Jackson about whether the Knicks are contenders or pretenders, and concerns about the center spot as the main sore spot of how things might go this year. But then at the end, I think this was a pretty interesting conversation that I wanted to continue on our show so that we could get into it. He asked me to rank the ostensible top four teams in the East, the teams that everybody seems to agree are going to be the top four: the Celtics, the Knicks, the Sixers, and the Bucks. And so we saw how my ranking went, which is I was basically like Celtics, Knicks, sort of in their own tier to a degree, little bit of a gap there, and then more or less a lock up tie between the Sixers and the Bucks, though I had the Sixers just ahead. How are you feeling on that ranking first off, before we kind of get into the nitty gritty of all that?
So I think I ultimately agree with the rankings. I think we might disagree on the margins, and this is probably not going to win me any fans with people listening to this show. I think the Celtics, and to be clear, you didn't say anything to the contrary, but I think they are kind of pretty substantially in their own tier at this point. And I think this is a rare designation to give to a team coming into the regular season. Like the only one in recent memory gave it to was the Kevin Durant Warriors. I think if Boston is healthy in the playoffs, which is a big if, it is a pretty significant disappointment if they don't ultimately win the championship this year. I think their historical greatness from last season, not a fun thing to say, was covered up by the fact they didn't play anyone in the playoffs, but they finished with the fourth best net rating in the entire history of the NBA last year. It is like, in terms of the fit of the starting five, the only other teams I could think of again in the last 25 years or so were that 2017 through 2019 Warriors and maybe that 04 Pistons team, that they didn't have quite the high end talent. Maybe these two other teams. I think their bench is pretty underrated. Hauser was really good in the finals. Pritchard was good throughout the playoffs. They're just like, I think there's a gap between Boston and everyone else. If the Knicks, I've said this a bunch, if they kept Isaiah Hartenstein, I would maybe put the Knicks in that tier one as well. As things stand, I think the Knicks are a step back. Fun stat I found on the Knicks in doing a little research for this podcast. Best two-man lineups in the NBA. So I was looking this up to say, maybe Philly's ahead of them with Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. They just kick everyone's butt when those two are on the floor. Instead, what I found is out of two-man lineups that had at least 200 minutes on the floor together, the Knicks had four of the best five, Alex, in the entire NBA, and OG Anunoby was in every single one of them, which just kind of served as a stark reminder to me, all right, when OG's on the floor, the Knicks played better basketball than anyone in the league last year. Sample size, schmample size. That's insane. It's enough for me to keep the Knicks in second. I know you highlighted it. I think Hartenstein is just such a big loss. I'm curious if Anunoby has the same effect when the floor spacing on offense isn't quite as good as what he got for most of his tenure. Did not play a lot of minutes with Mitch. I want to see how that affects things offensively. I want to see how that affects things defensively. And I do sit here wondering, I think there's enough confidence that I can put the Knicks at 2 and say, all right, it's not the orange and blue glasses. Do you think there's any chance out of loathing that we're underrating a Sixers team that added arguably if he's healthy, which is a big if, a better player than Mikal Bridges in Paul George? Their bench additions made it so they don't really have a clear weak point on their bench. I do think that's a separator between the Knicks and the Sixers, and that the Knicks have a higher end ceiling on their bench. I think the Sixers might have the better starting lineup coming into the year, but want to tell me why I'm wrong and everything I'm saying is totally blasphemous right now?
I mean, I do think if you just look at the numbers, like like you just said, like OG Anunoby when healthy. So if you want to talk about like the best possible scenario, like the best lineups that the Knicks could put on the floor, health concerns be damned, I think that OG helps put them in a class that I agree is still below Boston, but is closer to me to Boston than the field. And that might be orange or blue color glasses on my part. But I just think that the depth is the main thing. Like, I'm actually not super moved by the Sixers' depth, if I'm being completely honest. Like, I think Oubre is fine. I think honestly, I mean, he was, if anyone other than like Maxey had like a true, like, kind of breakout performance for the Sixers in the playoffs last year as they were pushing the Knicks, it was Oubre. Like, I remember when I talked to Keith Pompey when we did like our preview beforehand, the host of Locked On Sixers, and I was like, "Who do you think's going to guard Jalen Brunson?" He's like, "I think Kelly Oubre is going to guard Jalen Brunson." I like almost laughed in his face, like, "Yeah, okay, like be real. Who's going to guard it? Like, you think that's going to work?" Like, and it kind of did. Like, that was one of the only times it took Brunson like 3 games to figure out how to score on him, and even then, it was still a struggle for him. Like, he did great. So they did well to keep him, but Andre Drummond doesn't really move me. He gets rebounds, but I don't know. I'm not, as a backup center, I guess fine, but I think given the nature of Joel Embiid's injury history in his career, they're going to have to rely on him for heavy minutes at some point or another, and that's going to hurt their overall season prospectus. I think that George is great, but I think that there's a chance that with the mix that the Knicks have, that Mikal Bridges is more valuable to making them a better team than simply constructing a new big three in Philly using Paul George to go with Maxey and Embiid is to their overall team construction and team ceiling. Just because, for all the reasons that, sort of just were highlighted by the fact that you said, like, OG Anunoby came and on no practice time, no nothing, came in and set the NBA record for best. But I think by the time it was all said and done, he had the best single season plus minus or best plus minus with a single team or something like that. I just remember that in his minutes with the Knicks, they were like 250 points better overall in the amount of games they played, which I think only wound up being like 20 something, 30, something like that by, after the trade and with the injuries and everything like that. Like, that's obscene. I mean, they were just every single game when he was on the floor, they're like 15 points better. I think adding a player like Bridges, who gives you in some ways a very similar defensive impact, and just another guy that can fly around the floor, disrupt the other team's, I guess now, second best wing player. Like, you already have the guy that could guard the best wing player. Now you have the guy that can confidently guard the second best wing player on the floor, as well as like other good defenders you could throw out there. I just think, like, team chemistry mix wise, he's going to be so great on defense. I think he will be more than willing to slot into like that third scorer role, and like third option role behind Brunson and Julius Randle. Like, I'm sure that he, if you gave him truth serum, he'd probably be like, yeah, even I know I'm not fully cut out for that. Like Brooklyn wanted me to be. Like, I think I'm more comfortable being in this complementary role where I can have the scoring part come a little easier to me and then be a huge plus on the defensive end, like he was with Phoenix. So I just think, I think it's easy to forget because that kind of wasn't what he was tasked with doing in Brooklyn. He was tasked with essentially replacing Kevin Durant as like a focal point on their offense. I think if you look at it more from the perspective of what he did in Phoenix, he's a guy that is going to come in and like, he was a top 3 contender for defensive player of the year, like 3 seasons ago. And narrowly lost that. Like, a lot of people thought that he deserved it and probably should have won it that year. So, I mean, he's that level of defender when he's only being relied upon to be like a 18 point per game scorer or whatever, and be like a third option on offense. And I think that's more the Mikal Bridges we're going to see this year. And I think that's a big reason for me that, like, that Phoenix team was that good with a sort of similar-ish cast of characters to what you have on the Knicks, but I think worse, honestly. And he did that for them. So think about what he could possibly do for the Knicks, and that's where I think that's what raises the ceiling up, despite all the concerns about the center position, which obviously everybody heard my thoughts on Locked On NBA. Like, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I think, and we'll wrap this up as we're going a little long on it, but I think the biggest argument in Philly's favor is just that, at least on paper, the starting 5 fits together better than the Knicks starting 5, and that they can go 5 out and they will go 5 out early on in the year. And that kind of puts them in a tier only with the Celtics. Like, I know Indiana can do that too, but in terms of having like at least 3 bona fide, like all-star caliber guys and having that level of shooting, while the Knicks are sort of 3.75 out, like depending on how you count Randall. And the Knicks can get to lineups where they have that. Like we've talked about it a bunch, but the Knicks' best lineup might be their small ball group. It might be Brunson, Devo, Bridges, Anunoby, and Mitch. And it's just sort of the fit of Julius Randle, where I think Philly, the questions are all about, can those guys stay on the floor? Will they actually show up in the biggest moments? Like the Knicks, we don't really have any question about that. For Philly, it's like, can they do it when the lights are the brightest? But on paper, you can make the case the lineup is better. Of course, the games aren't played on paper. On paper, Philly should have beat the Knicks in the first round last year, and that obviously did not happen. We'll wrap up real quick on this. My last team in tier 2 was the Bucks. Alex, I don't want to belabor the point because you talked about them quite a bit with Jackson in that first segment. I think the only thing I wanted to add to what you said, which I thought was all good and all on point, and I agree to pretty much all of it, is just despite adding Gary Trent Jr., which I think is a clear upgrade, at the ages all those guys are, Giannis, like I think turning 30 this year with a game that's entirely contingent on athleticism. Chris Middleton constantly hurt. I think had 2 different ankle surgeries this offseason. Brook Lopez into his mid-30s. Damian Lillard approaching his mid-30s as a smaller guard. Like, why do we think any one of those guys is going to be better / healthier this year than they were last year? You could just make the case that with luck, they will be there, and Milwaukee at their best, I think, can beat the Sixers. I think can beat the Knicks. I think can give Boston a run for their money. I just don't know why we have any reasonable expectation that it'll go better this year than last year when those guys are just all like entering their 30s and only getting older.
Yeah, I'm pretty well with you there too. I mean, I think I voiced as much, but I'll talk about the Bucks real quick, and we can finish the Bucks point before we, just for fun, get into the rest of the contenders through the rest of the top 8 in the East. So we'll do that in just a moment here. But first, I wanted to let you all know about our friends over at FanDuel. And you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. That's pretty cool. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. So if you want some place to go spend that measly little $5 bet, which is all you have to do to get 3 weeks free of NFL Sunday Ticket, that's crazy, man. I mean, that's a sick deal. Fantasy football season's coming up. I'm certainly on board with that. But if you want somewhere to put your $5, I don't know, maybe you follow the same thread that we're talking about right now. They already have odds up for the NBA Eastern Conference winner of this coming season. They have it ranked, Vegas and FanDuel, as plus 145 for the Celtics to win the East, plus 450 for the Sixers, plus 470 for the Knicks, and plus 500 for the Bucks, followed by odds of plus 2,000 and beyond for the Magic, the Cavs, the Heat, the Pacers, etc. So I don't know. Maybe, if you want to swing things in the Knicks' favor and you're feeling pretty confident about their chances, plus 470. I mean, if they start getting enough money, those odds are going to go down. So maybe give that a shot right now. Maybe make that your $5 bet, because why not? But if you want to do that, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, and we're back in, Gavin. So the Bucks point, I want to just say I feel pretty similar. Like the injuries are the main thing with them, and I just feel like for whatever reason, I think that they're less able to absorb a somewhat major injury than the Sixers are. Like, I guess I could just see. I think the main one for the Sixers that worries me, that would worry me the most if I was a Sixers fan, would be like Maxey, actually. Like, I feel like if Maxey goes down, they're ill-equipped to replace him very easily, because honestly, they just lost to the Knicks for a minimum salary. One of the guys that, like, last year could have been the best guy to step in for a Maxey and campaign, who's now going to be on the Knicks instead. They brought back Kyle Lowry, which, like, great, but he's clearly not a full-time player anymore. So
they have Reggie Jackson too. So I guess he's.
Oh, that's true. Campaign. I forgot about Reggie Jackson. That's true. So I guess that's a little bit better of a step in, but still, I mean, I think he's kind of on the downswing of his career too. Like it's not the same Reggie Jackson of like 4 years ago.
Sure.
So Maxey probably worries me the most, but he's also probably the guy you have to worry least about getting hurt. George and Embiid, though, like I feel like if one of them goes down and needs to be out for like 10 games, I do think they're okay built to deal with that. I already said I'm not a huge Andre Drummond guy, but for regular season games, I think he's less harmful than postseason games for what you could do out there. And he's going to gobble up the rebounds and just generally be a large human. And that plays better in the regular season than it does in the postseason. Whereas like I do think that Milwaukee did fantastic adding Gary Trent Jr. Like I think that's maybe the value signing of the offseason. Like, I don't know if I think we've already talked about this like 3 times on the show, but it's kind of flabbergasting that they got him for that low of an amount of money, considering how young he is and how much he's accomplished in his career to this point. Like as a scorer, you would think that this should be like a 10 million a year player, if not more. And so it was bizarre seeing him get so little money, but maybe that sort of injury proofs them a bit with their biggest injury risk, which is Middleton, who just really can't seem to miss any less than like 30 games anymore, which is concerning if you're trying to fight for playoff seeding and, hopefully stay healthy enough for the playoffs, which is always the issue.
Alex, even when he's on the floor, like he's not always himself. Like he was amazing in the first round, but Milwaukee spent 2 seasons trying to get him up to speed. And like every time you're kind of like, all right, is this the end? Is this it? And like he'll come back, but like how many times can you do that?
Yeah, exactly. And he doesn't get any younger,
No.
The same could be said for Dame Lillard, who finally is starting to look a little more mortal with his injury situation as well. Like last couple of years, dealing more with injuries that are persistent and everything else. So, I think they just worry me more. I think there's just I described it in the Locked On NBA segment as like they're sort of walking on this like tightrope, or like walking a real fine line. Both those teams, I think, as far as injuries are concerned, and I just think the Bucks rope is a little thinner than the Sixers rope as far as how much they're going to be able to absorb whatever injury woes and age related concerns and whatever might come their way this season. But let's talk about some of the other teams real quick, just for fun, because why not? We got through all the main contenders that we're talking about on Locked On NBA, but I'll just present this the same way that Jackson presented it to me, right? So I'll just say rank these 4 teams in the order that you think that they'll finish. Did he worded it as finish the regular season?
Yeah, so I was doing this. Maybe I lost the plot here. My personal list here is championship equity. I think is the most interesting way to do it. So that's how I did my rankings. But yeah.
So we'll do it that way. So we'll say which one do you think is most likely to make it out of the Eastern Conference as a surprise team? The Orlando Magic, Cleveland Cavaliers, Miami Heat, and Indiana Pacers. What's your order there?
Yeah, so I said this to you pre-show. I think I could hear any order of these 4 teams, and I would not call the person an idiot by any means. I had the Pacers at 1. Maybe that's just out of respect for their Eastern Conference Finals run. Like if Giannis had just been healthy in the first round, Alex, and they lose that in 6 games, like is anyone even talking about them this year? But I don't know. I think they're the most similar to the Knicks in their just sheer amount of depth, and that they can just keep putting out like above average basketball player after above average basketball player. Guys like Nembhard could be better this year. Obi could like build on a career year. I'm excited to see what like some of the really young guys like Walker could potentially bring to the table, give them a little bit more athleticism. Halliburton could still have another mini leap in him. So I think I just like the improvement there for a team that already made the Eastern Conference Finals. My next 3, again, could be in any order. I have the Cavs at 2nd. I just still think like it's such a weird team in that they're so reliant on one specific player making a skill jump we're not sure he's ever going to make. Like if Evan Mobley becomes just like not a great 3-point shooter, if he becomes Julius Randle shooting 3s, I think that totally transforms their team. I think they could be as good as almost anyone in the non-Boston category, maybe a step below the Knicks and Sixers, but I don't know. I think they could be awesome, but like there's still like we just haven't seen it from them. We haven't seen the toughness from them, and they really struggled with Orlando, even though Orlando was a little bit beat up. So I can't put them higher than that. Miami, if this was a regular season standings, they would clearly be last out of these 8 teams, but I just think you still can't count them out in a playoff series just because Spoelstra's such a genius. If they're healthy, Jimmy Butler, though, is turning that corner towards maybe not quite being the same guy anymore. I think it'd be interesting if Jaquez or Jovic made another leap. I think we both kind of agree on Hero, where we're sort of dicey on him. Full season of Terry Rozier will help them a lot. We both really like Khalil Ware. And then the Magic is the team I'm being really unfair to. And I think we're going to have Philip Rossman-Reich on at some point, Alex. I know you had him on to talk Okiki, but to do a full dive on them and to tell me why I'm wrong here. But I just think for them to like make a get out of the East somehow, it would take Paolo or Franz making just a monumental leap. And I think we're both in agreement. They're still a few years away from that. So, but how would you have those 4 teams ordered?
Yeah, I think I'm probably, I don't know. It's so tough because the margins are very thin. I will say I think I have, and this isn't just the hater in me speaking, I think definitively I have the Heat last. I just think their time is up. I think they're going to have to reach another soft reset at some point, and I don't know if another Jimmy Butler is going to come along to kind of like save them from mediocrity this
Yeah.
time. Because he really, I mean, he just injected this like wilting core of Miami and just gave them like another solid 4 or 5 years, which is infuriating, quite frankly. It's very annoying of him that he decided to do that, and go, take their whatever supplements they're offering down there that allows everybody to just stay ageless or whatever. Very annoying, but I do think that they're just kind of, I think Jimmy is reaching a point where like age and injuries and stuff are starting to catch up to him. The nicks and bruises add up a little more throughout the season for him now. I don't think you can keep relying on him to play like 2012 Tibbsian minutes anymore and, get the Heat where they need to go. I don't buy in on Hero. I don't even know if I particularly buy in on Bam, if I'm being completely honest, as like a guy at the level that they're paying him to be, of like they're like number 2. I don't know if I necessarily buy it. I don't think that he brings quite enough on offense, and I don't know. I know he's very good on defense, but I just don't know if he's like max level player good on defense to make up for everything else. Like, I don't think he's Rudy Gobert, let's put it that way, who I think is one of the only guys you can argue that basically just on his defensive merit is enough to make like damn near max money. So from that perspective, I've got them the lowest. Then sort of a toss up for the other 3 for me. I will say like the team that I could maybe most easily see making the leap up to that next level would be the Magic, just because I just think that the talent level is there, and they have way more unknowns on their team. Like, I think that the Cavs and the Pacers have a lot of somewhat known quantities on their team already. At least as far as the guys that they're banking on the most, where like you feel like they're sort of finished products. Like, I guess Halliburton can still get better. Like, he's still fairly young, but he came into the league not exactly like super young, so he was always going to be sort of on that like curve where, you sort of cap his potential at like, 3 years less than some of his peers, sort of thing, because he was coming in with 18-year-olds and he was like 21 years old, I think, when he got drafted.
Yeah, so he's 20. He's 24 right now. Just
24 right now. Yeah. So, or maybe he was only 20. Either way, I mean, it's, he's closer to his prime than like his like true prime than say like Anthony Edwards, for example, out of that same draft class. So, and then like Siakam is, on the older end, he's like fully in his prime, so like they're sort of capitalizing on that. Donovan Mitchell, same deal, was like fully in his prime. I don't know how much more he's going to like improve per se. Mobley, I'm starting to, I don't want to say be out on, but I'm less convinced that he's going to be like some all NBA talent at this point. I think there's just a decent chance that he's like a good defensive 4/5 who maybe never figures out how to play the 5, which would be the biggest derailment of his career. But like, someone who's not necessarily going to move you on offense on any given night, which I think he kind of needs to be, especially considering the amount of money they just handed him. And then like Jared Allen has similar limitations to like Mitchell Robinson that we talk about all the time, and it's that kind of thing. So, and Darius Garland they still have as well, who I think also is just sort of plateaued a little bit. So I guess I just sort of struggle to see where that team gets better.
Yeah.
Which was sort of a consistent theme on Donovan Mitchell's last team too, with the Jazz. So maybe that's just a theme that follows him around. And then like Orlando, though, I think the big thing for me is like all those guys, they've accumulated so much talent. And unlike a team like Detroit or whatever, that's made all these lottery picks that have just kind of gone nowhere, like they've hit on a number of picks now. And like these guys just keep getting better. So like I could see Franz Wagner getting a year better. I could see Banchero getting a year better. And, learning from the experiences from last year, like just Anthony Black, who was like pretty raw last year, gets a year better. Maybe he gets better at shooting the ball, stuff like that. That earns him more playing time. They had KCP, which I think is like
huge. It's huge.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty huge addition. Like that's a championship level role player. Like, I don't know. It's very akin to me to like a team like the Lakers adding like Trevor Ariza back in the day. You know what I mean? Like maybe on paper doesn't look like a huge addition, but it's like someone that can like grow with the team a little bit because he's not like totally like old yet. You know what I mean? He's not like past his prime by any means, but like is a championship level guy that can impart that on the other guys on this team. Like I think that's pretty huge for them. And of all these teams that I've mentioned so far, I think that Orlando has probably the only rookie that I would say I feel somewhat confident might crack the rotation and actually make like a difference for them this year. And De Silva, like the more I watched about him, like leading up to the draft, I was just like, I think this kid is good. Like, I think that he's going to be one of those guys that could just come in and give you like, if all works out, he could be sort of Josh Hart-ish, where I feel like he's just going to be all over the place, getting rebounds, seems to have enough of a handle of the ball to like dribble it up in transition and whatever, and do that sort of thing, and plays good defense. It's just like constant motion, active dude. Like I could totally see him cracking their rotation this year and possibly making a difference and being one of those like Christian Brown-esque guys, that comes in his rookie year and is like so good that he actually elevates an already good team. So I think there's a possibility that happens, though maybe not the most likely. But I guess all that just adds up to like I sort of just have all those three on equal footing, which is a cop-out. But I would not be surprised if Orlando, who remember was in like a dogfight with the Knicks for like the 4 or 5 seed for like most of the regular season last year and just kind of faltered at the end a little bit while the Knicks rose. But like they're good. They're going to be really good, and they're going to be really fun. And I think they're going to play really fast ball, and they're very deep. Like they have a lot of talent on that team. And so they're going to have a lot of opportunities to find the right mix all year long. And maybe by the time the playoffs come around, they find a mix that like is good enough to potentially sneak into like the ECF or something. So yeah, that's where
now they're totally stacked. De Silva, I think in summer league shot like almost 60% from 3, which probably will not carry over. But that's the thing. Like the one thing they were missing was shooting, and KCP brings that. De Silva brings that. I think maybe when I'm looking at this in my mind, I'm realizing the way I actually did these rankings was which teams would I be most afraid of if the Knicks had to face them in the playoffs. And for some reason, I think the Knicks would beat Orlando in 5, unless again, Paolo or Franz becomes like top 10 player in the league good, which is unlikely, but not impossible. Like I just think they don't have an answer for Brunson. And like Miami, at least you can point to Jimmy Butler. Cleveland, you can point to Donovan Mitchell. Indiana, you could point to Halliburton. You could point to Pascal Siakam, who was just a killer in the playoffs. Like he shocked me with how good he was. But anyways, Alex, I don't want to belabor the point here, because this whole episode was just sort of a primer for what we're going to be doing going forward, which is the same thing as last year, interviewing a bunch of Eastern Conference hosts and getting to know all these teams, hearing what they think about the Knicks, and hearing how much each one of them can challenge the Knicks. So we're going to do a deep dive on all that in the coming weeks. But until that time, he's Alex Wolf. I'm Gavin Shull. This was an initial primer on your Eastern Conference tiers. So much more to come here on Locked On Knicks. Yeah.